And welcome back to another episode of the Chips Podcast. Tyler Melito alongside Ryan Amick once again. Ryan, how are you, sir?
Doing great this fine evening. How about yourself?
You know what? I can't complain. The sun is out. It's starting to feel like summer a little bit. Hopefully, we can enjoy the summer once this whole quarantine lets up. But for now,
Stuff's starting to open tomorrow, actually, May 20th.
That is true.
Yeah.
And sports are starting to come back. We had some golf over the weekend, UFC last week. We get more golf this weekend. NASCAR was back. So, you know what? We're getting steps in the right direction. But anyway, we do have something to talk about from last week. So we recorded last Thursday, and there was something that was released on Wednesday that we just didn't talk about because we wanted to do it at a later date. And that was the NBA or ESPN released a list of the top 74 NBA players in history. Why 74? I don't know. Maybe that's because
there's a 74th anniversary.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. I don't know why they didn't wait till next year to make it 75. Like I feel it was a little premature, the list. It was just an odd number. They could have waited till next year. That would have been like 75th anniversary, even that's an odd number, but it's kind of incremental numbers, periods of 5 kind of. I don't know. It just 74, it's a little odd. I feel like they did a year early.
Wasn't the 50th anniversary 1997?
I thought so.
I thought
the league was founded in 46.
When was? I'm Googling it right now. The NBA was founded in June 6, 1946. So
yeah, 46. So this is the 74th year.
All right, so that makes a little more sense.
Makes sense.
All right, but anywho, we got the entire list. We both do. We'll break it down. We'll talk about some guys that were notable to us who maybe didn't make the list, guys who were ranked too high, we feel were ranked too low. And then we'll get specifically into the top 10, give our own personal top 10s. And yeah, let's get right into it. Ryan, who were some – we'll split it into 3 sections. We'll go to 74 to 41. That's how ESPN did it. Once again, why, I don't know. But of that grouping, who were some guys that stood out to you, maybe just missing the cut, 75 or lower or whatever it is, or some guys that probably in your thought in that group should have been ranked higher or lower?
Yeah, so overall, looking at this list, I thought it was a pretty solid list, not too much to complain with. But 2 players, looking at the bottom, I thought should have been somewhere in the rankings, weren't included in the list at all, surprisingly. Klay Thompson and Carmelo Anthony, personally for me, I thought definitely should have been on this list somewhere. You look at Klay Thompson, he's been part of this Warriors dynasty that was, for 4 years, were the unstoppable best team in the league. He was the second best player on that team before they got Kevin Durant, a team that won the championship back in 2015. He's one of the greatest shooters this league has ever seen. And you look at some of the lists, I think this is in between the 74 to 41 range. You have guys like Ray Allen, Reggie Miller, who are also among those top shooters in NBA history. And to not have Klay amongst those guys, especially when Ray Allen, he was part of some dynasties, but he was also like third option. And he wasn't, as highly as maybe Klay Thompson, especially when you look at defense as well. He's been an all-defensive player multiple times. Past 5 years, he's been an all-star, or at least when he was healthy. He wasn't this year because he's been out. He's been an all-NBA player a couple times. I mean, this is one of the premier guards the league has seen, one of the best shooters, an underrated great defender on the perimeter. I think he definitely should have been somewhere in the top 74. I was surprised not to see him on there, especially when you look ahead to his teammates. Curry and KD are very high on the list.
Yeah.
And just to see the gap between those two are top 20 so odd players ever, and then Klay not even top 74. I mean, I don't think the gap's that big. I think Klay is a huge part of that Warriors dynasty and a sure Hall of Famer, and I think he deserves to be on this list with the rest of the Hall of Famers that are on this list. Then you look at Melo. I mean, sure, recently Melo has not been what he used to be, is kind of a shell of his former self. He's been known as a ball hog. He was kind of the last great American ball hog. ESPN actually wrote an article on that, which makes total sense because he actually was. But for a solid 10 or so years, he would never score less than 21 points. He did it efficiently. He's an unstoppable scorer. You look, even before he went into the NBA, when he was at our alma mater, Syracuse, he won a chip. He's been a multiple-time gold medalist in the Olympics. He's just a reliable scorer. He's a sure Hall of Famer, top pick in the draft. Sure, he hasn't had the best success in the playoffs, but when you look at some of the guys on this list who are also kind of fit that mold of scorers, who kind of not stat padded, but had 23 or so odd points, not much success in the playoffs, as they were the top guy on their team. You look at guys like Bernard King kind of in that level. He was ranked 69. Alex English played for the Nuggets as well. It was almost the Melo before Melo came there. And he averaged less points, but he's 67 on this list. And just when you look at some of the guys, I'm not discrediting them, but I think Melo is along with those guys. I think Melo should be in that 60-ish range. Or maybe he's not a top 50 player, but he should be somewhere on this list. And I kind of thought it was shocking to leave him off because I think most people would consider him a Hall of Famer in some right. He's one of the best scorers this league has seen. So I think Clay and Melo were two guys that I thought would have been on this list.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from, especially with Melo, given the longevity of his career. Sure, like you said, he hasn't had that. He doesn't have the ring yet, but we see a lot of guys. Russell Westbrook's on this list. He's ranked 43rd or something. He's higher in this tier. Chris Paul's obviously up there. The thing with Clay, I think that he just hasn't done it long enough as a number one guy. That's the one knock against him. A lot of these guys either were all-time legends for what they did, like someone like a Ray Allen, like you mentioned. He's the NBA's all-time leading three-point scorer. Or there are some other guys like Bernard King, who is the number one guy on the Knicks for a good portion of his career. So those guys get that spot. But there are a lot of guys who I think were in this section specifically that I think were underrated, that didn't get higher. Someone like a Dennis Rodman and Alonzo Mourning. Rodman 62, Mourning 63. Rodman, we just watched The Last Dance. How important he was for that second Bulls three-peat, replacing Horace Grant on that team and probably taking the Bulls to even higher levels than they were prior to Rodman joining the team. I can't see how – I don't understand why he's so low. I guess part of the theory is he wasn't a scorer. All he really did was rebound and defense. But those are two very important aspects. And then Alonzo Mourning, for me, when you think of the Miami Heat, you think of three guys really. You think of Dwayne Wade, you think of LeBron, and you think of Alonzo Mourning, at least for me. And I think Alonzo Mourning, for what he did for that organization and what he did for the game of basketball, I feel like that certainly gets overlooked. And then there are some guys who I think are a little overrated. Russ, perfect example of that. The guy is, I'm scrolling down to find it right now. He's 42nd on his list. Sure, he averaged a triple-double for 3 straight seasons, but what else has he really done? I really don't know. And is he worth being ahead of some other guys and legends like an Elvin Hayes or a Dominique Wilkins, who was ranked 46, Anthony Davis, who was ranked 45? I mean, guys have transcended talent, but is he really worth a spot ahead of someone like Reggie Miller, who, if you saw the episode 9 of The Last Dance, Michael Jordan feared those Indiana Pacers teams. Like, Reggie Miller revolutionized the outside shooting game for a guy his size, with his ability, was the first number one in three-pointers made in history. And he falls behind guys like Bill Walton, who, sure, he won a championship with Portland, but he got injured and really didn't do much after that. So there were a lot of question marks for me. Some guys I think could have been moved higher, some lower, but overall, I agree with most of – I'm glad that there are guys on this list that made it. There's no one who I said, like, oh, he definitely should have made it over this guy.
I wouldn't discredit Westbrook too much. I definitely think he's a top 50 player just on stats alone. I mean, he's got better stats than most of the players in the 74 to 41 range. So on stats alone, he deserves to be there. But I think some people like a part of him that reflects that 90s era that you were reflecting with Reggie Miller and how he's a tough outing for MJ, and we saw on the doc how they played tough and hard all the time. That's what Westbrook does day in and day out. And part of the reason he didn't have success in the playoffs when he was on the Thunder is he didn't have much of a supporting cast when KD left. Sure, he had Paul George. That didn't work out. So that's a knock on his career. That's why he's not one of the all-time greats. But I think just looking at top 50, he's an MVP. He's averaged triple-double 3 times, which is unheard of for a season. So I think where he is respectable. Looking back to my Klay Thompson argument, someone on the list who I think kind of played the Klay Thompson role, but to a lesser degree, is someone like a Manu Ginobili, who is on a dynasty and the Spurs and was a key part of them, won multiple championships, but the numbers and the play do not parallel to Klay Thompson. Klay Thompson is a much better talent than Manu Ginobili was. He started more than Manu, who was a great player off the bench, but having a starter on a dynasty, the second best player on that team until KD came, I think he deserves to be on the list more than Manu. And then talking about Manu, he's one of the guys I think was ranked a little too high on this list, especially when you look at his partner, Tony Parker. is ranked, I think, 10, 12 spots behind him.
Yeah.
And Tony Parker was actual multiple-time All-Star. He started on that team, won a Finals MVP one year. I think Tony Parker is definitely the better player. So to have Manu not only this high, but above guys like Tony Parker, who was on his team, above guys like Klay Thompson, I thought was a little concerning. And then one of the biggest ones I have a huge problem with, you mentioned his name, Bill Walton.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy was great for 2 years, like very, very good. He won a the Portland's only title, even with greats like Clyde Drexler, Damian Lillard making this list. Great players for Portland. He's the only one to get him a title, which kudos to him. He had a really good stretch in the late 70s, but the late 70s had very weak talent. I mean, aside from Kareem, that's when Wilt and Bill Russell were done. That was before Magic and Bird. That in the era of basketball was one of its weaker times. There were odd teams winning the championship, like the Supersonics won a couple years after, the Bullets. The Knicks won twice. That tells you something. The competition's maybe
the
not
beginning
too
of the
great in the
70s.
But when you just look at Bill Walton, I compare him almost to a Derrick Rose. Like, he had two really good years before injuries started to take a toll on him, and he won MVP just like Derrick Rose did. He won a chip, which is the difference between those two. But then when you look at his stats, only averaged 13 for his career, was only a two-time All-NBA player and All-Star. Just was really dominant in the beginning of his career. Unfortunately, injuries caused his decline. He did win another chip with Celtics, but he's more of a role player at that point. So, but comparing him to someone like D Rose, you wouldn't have D Rose this high. Maybe you'll have D Rose in the Hall of Fame. He's a great player. Unfortunately, injuries caused this. And even looking at the list, Bill Walton was listed as he's one of the biggest what-ifs in NBA history. I don't think that merits a top 50 ranking. That's very high up for someone who doesn't have as big a resume as Bill Walton. And then that kind of leads into someone who I thought was ranked pretty low on this list that kind of played the same position, same type of era, Willis Reed for the Knicks. I mean, looking at all right, let me hear me out. It's a homer pick, but also I know more about the Knicks because I'm a Knicks fan. And having Willis Reed about 20 or so odd spots behind other Knicks greats like Walt Frazier and Patrick Ewing, it's kind of concerning to me because those three I think are very up there in Knicks history. Willis Reed is actual only MVP in Knicks history. He led the Knicks to their only titles in 70 and 73, won MVP in both of those finals, had the great comeback in I think it was Game 7 of the first finals against the Lakers, where he came back from injury through the tunnel and won them that game. So I think in terms of Knicks history, he should be up there right alongside Ewing, if not above even Frazier. So to have him at 60 and 20 spots behind those guys, have him 10 spots behind Bill Walton, who had 2 good years. He had 1 chip and 1 MVP. Willis Reed had 1 MVP, 2 chips, and 2 finals MVPs and was better for a longer period of time. I think they kind of messed up that part of it. They ranked Bill Walton a little too high, Willis Reed a little too low. But I mean, it's kind of nitpicky. Most of the list, 74 to 41, I thought was pretty solid. But just looking at those type of players, I thought that was notable, and I didn't necessarily agree with.
Yeah, and I think branching off that Bill Walton point, because that's the thing. He made the 50th All NBA or anniversary team back in 1996, and I think that was another controversial pick. There were some guys who should have made it, like a Dominique Wilkins didn't make that roster, and Bill Walton did. Sure, Bill Walton had those couple good years, but like you said, he got hurt. He really wasn't the same guy after that. He was a decent role player for the Celtics, but he wasn't the Bill Walton that was there in Portland. And that is Derrick Rose's main argument for the Hall of Fame. Anyone who says Derrick Rose is a Hall of Famer should circle to, well, Bill Walton's a Hall of Famer. So there you go. And another
difference is the ring, but I mean, aside from that,
it's a different era.
It's a different era, and their careers are almost identical. They were on fire, top of the league for 2-3 years, and then injuries just destroyed it. So yeah, I like that comparison, but I'll let you continue.
Yeah, and then you mentioned Ginobili and Tony Parker. I think Ginobili is one of the – I don't even think Tony Parker should be on this list, to be totally honest, just because he was the second guy to Tim Duncan. Sure, he won that one Finals MVP, but that was Tim Duncan's team. Tony Parker kind of after that 2013-14 run where the Spurs made it back, he just dove off. Ginobili still kind of played consistent for – the final years of his career, and he revolutionized the game. I think that's why he ranks a little bit higher than Parker. But I think Ginobili and Parker, I think they're overrated strictly because they won 5 championships with the Spurs. I think if they had 0 championships or maybe 2 championships, they wouldn't be considered greats of the game at all. Although Ginobili, I think, is a little bit better than Tony Parker, but that's a different issue. Another guy who I have one big qualm with is Clyde Drexler. I think he's ranked too low. I think he's a top 40 player without a doubt. The guy, he took over a Blazers team. Sure, they never made it to a champion. Like, they didn't win a championship, but he was the top guy. He was the second to Jordan, the second best shooting guard to Jordan for their entire careers. He won 2 titles. Or is it 1 title? He won a title with Houston at least. I get my year. Yeah, Drexler. He won a title with Jordan, or with Hakeem Olajuwon, and he was arguably the second best guy on that team, and probably was the second best guy on that team. And the guy was a dream team member. He just was a dynamic scorer. It's just one of those things where I don't see how he's considered worse than Vince Carter, who's 2 spots ahead of him, Ray Allen, who's 1 spot ahead of him. Gary Payton's another guy who I think is ranked too low, but I do think Clyde Drexler is better than that. That's another thing. Gary Payton, 53. The glove. The guy was the first point guard ever, first and only point guard to win Defensive Player of the Year. The guy was a monster on defense, and he's ranked 53rd. I think there's some definite issues here, but because like Tracy McGrady's ranked 52nd.
That's like another Melo example. Like, he couldn't get past the first round. It was a great score, but I mean,
injury issues.
He had injury, and Melo didn't even have that many injury issues, and he got farther in the playoffs than T-Mac.
Right.
So I mean, I don't know why are they comparing it so off? Like, why is Melo so much lower than T-Mac if they're virtually kind of the same career arc and type of player? Like, scoring first, not great as a first team option come playoff time.
And don't get me wrong, I love watching T-Mac play. He was one of the funnest guys to watch. But is he a Hall of Famer? I could make the argument that he's not. I'll be honest.
Didn't he make it?
He is. But you can make the argument that is he really a Hall of Famer, though, despite being an excellent scorer and having a great career? I'm not really sure of that. And I think he is definitely another guy who's rated too high. But overall, though, we do have our issues with this section, but I do think they did a good job. The one argument you have to make always when you're debating lists like this, if you're going to add someone, who are you going to take off? That's always the issue. So when you say Carmelo Anthony, well, who are you going to take off for Carmelo Anthony? Are you going to take off the guy who's in 74th place, Artis Gilmore, or are more things going to get shifted around? Because there comes a point in time where you just can't move a guy from, let's say, 43rd all the way off the list because you want to put on Carmelo Anthony. I mean, but overall, I think they did a good job. They're experts, so they know what they're talking about. Next up, the 40 to 11 section. So these are some guys who are probably just missing the cut for the top 10, I'm saying, to greats of the game all around. And you mentioned it with Walt Frazier. The guy's 39th. I totally agree with you that he should be closer to Willis Reed. Maybe not behind Willis Reed, but there's definitely an argument there given the fact that Willis Reed was the number 1 guy on that team.
He was the captain. He was the leader of that team, an MVP. I mean, some would argue, I don't know, I'm not from the 70s, but people watching from the 70s might argue that Willis Reed was a better player. So to have them that big a gap between 2 players on the same team, the same championship team, it's just kind of questionable to me.
Yeah. And then another guy who I think is rated too high, although I think when his career is done, he will be one of the greatest, is Giannis. He's during 27th.
Way too high.
Right.
Way too. That's ridiculous. I mean, sure, everyone knows he'll be probably an all-time great future Hall of Famer and all that, but to already have him ahead of guys in the current NBA like Anthony Davis, like James Harden, like a Westbrook or a Chris Paul that are on this list that he's ahead of already, I mean, that's just jumping the gun way too early. If we're doing career trajectory, he'll most likely be top 25. But to have him almost there already is kind of an insult to some of the players who have already played, just given how small Giannis' sample size is. And when you mentioned this small sample size kind of with Klay Thompson, I know Giannis is better than Klay Thompson, but they've both been in the same kind of length career-wise.
Klay's been a little bit longer.
Yeah, Klay's been in the league longer than Giannis has. And I know Giannis has won an MVP, might even win it this year, but he also hasn't had the best playoff success so far, hasn't done much outside of the regular season. So to have him this high is also big red flag. And I know a lot of people on ESPN, on some shows, mentioned this when they were reviewing the list. Like, Giannis is way too high already.
Yeah. And one other guy who I'll say is too high, and then you can give some of your guys, Steve Nash. First of all,
That was one
I
of
have
mine.
so many issues with Steve Nash.
Yeah.
Great passer, sure. But he really benefited when the NBA changed some of his rules around because he had his best years in his 30s. The guy, for the beginning of his career, when he was with Dallas and with Phoenix and back with Dallas, the
He
guy,
averaged 10 points.
he averaged 10 points. He was the number 2 maybe on that team to Dirk Nowitzki, maybe even 3 or 4 on those teams. He wasn't going to be considered a Hall of Famer like he is now. And then he goes to Phoenix. They changed some of the rules up to allow more leverage to the offensive player. And he plays in a system for Mike D'Antoni that is run and gun, throw the ball wherever, and just score or just thrive. And that's what Steve Nash did. He was able to set up guys like a Sean Marion and Amari Stoudemire, Joe Johnson for a little bit, and won 2 MVPs. First of all, the fact that Steve Nash has 2 MVPs, Shaquille O'Neal has 1, Kobe Bryant has 1, Allen Iverson has 1, makes 0 sense to me. Steve Nash, he just benefited from being in a system and in an era. If you put him in any other era, he would be eaten alive. So Steve Nash would be way overrated. I'm taking one guy off this list, it might be Steve Nash.
No, all right. I was going to say, I agree with you with the Steve Nash take. Don't go that far.
You could make the argument.
No, stop it.
He's top 74 because he's top 74 because of the fact he has 2 MVPs and was.
Well, he did earn
great.
those MVPs. I know
He didn't earn them. Come on.
All right, let me get into my Nash take. So I agree with you. He's very high on this list. I think what ESPN valued a little too much when considering this list is MVPs, which is a flawed system because it's really narrative based. It's not the best player in the league. Because obviously Steve Nash was not the best player for 2 years in a row, especially with Kobe Bryant averaging like almost double
35,
the points he was averaging. Yeah, and then Steve Nash was averaging 18. It's almost double the points, and you're going to give the MVP to him. That's another issue. But they just focus too much on the MVPs, which is why Giannis is so high on this, because he's probably going to be a back-to-back MVP getter just like Nash was. And they value that so much because, I mean, by the title, you're the best player in the league pretty much if you win that award. But we know that's not the case because LeBron would be like 14-time MVP by now because he's been the best in the league for this long. So it's a narrative-based award. We shouldn't give too much credit for it. I think they gave Nash a little too much credit for this, especially because he did not go very far in the playoffs at all because he always ran into a Lakers team or the
Spurs team.
The Suns couldn't take that next step to a finals team, which is looking at Chris Paul, who's number 40 on this list, who some may argue is better than Steve Nash. That was another narrative for him. He couldn't go the extra step in the playoffs. He was almost an MVP getter. He lost it to Kobe that year, even though Chris Paul was great that year. But he was a better defender than Nash was, even maybe a better passer. Nash, I think, had maybe more assists, but just you look at the Clippers era for Chris Paul. I mean, he was one of the best passers I've ever seen in my entire life. And I think just the point guards in general, they kind of mixed up in this ranking because you look at one of the biggest low balls as well, Isaiah Thomas at 31. I know a lot of analysts looked at this and were kind of upset by it because not only with the doc did he get kind of disrespected and undervalued, but now with this list, he's ranked as 31 as like the 7th best point guard, which is ridiculous because I think there's 3 point guards who are obviously top tier: Magic Johnson, Oscar Robertson, Steph Curry. But then you look at the second tier, I think Isaiah Thomas leads anyone else in that category. You have guys like Stockton and Nash ahead of Isaiah on this list. I don't really agree with that. Isaiah in a tough era with Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, won 2 chips when he was the leader of that team, had great ball handling, good passer, leading scorer as well. He's a very undervalued player because they had a different style of play with a lot of people didn't like or agree with, but you can't deny his talent. He's definitely a top 25 player. He's ranked a little too low. He should be above players like Stockton and Nash. And then also moving ahead a little bit, talking about another point guard, Steph Curry and KD, they have Steph one above KD. I mean,
at 13 too. At 13.
I know that Steph revolutionized the game, 2-time MVP, unanimous MVP during their 73-win season, and he's unbelievable. He'll probably end up in the top 10 NBA players when it's all said and done. But KD was always the best player on that team when they had him. He won both finals MVPs when they won their back-to-back titles. He's just a better scorer in general because he has to be. He's 7 foot, has no flaws in his offensive game. I mean, just looking at a play, like a talent standpoint, you can't argue that KD's better than Steph, even though Steph's impact on the league is greater. And, maybe Steph's a better leader, doesn't have as many problems with the media as KD had, which is also a knock on kind of Isaiah, which is why they might be lowballing these type of guys because they don't like the media that much. This is the media, they're making the list, so might be some bias in there. But it's not that big of a gap. I mean, KD and Steph, they were top 5 players in the league for a reason. So to have one over the other is not just unheard of and unreasonable. But I think most people who watch basketball would be like, KD is better than Steph Curry. KD was arguably the best player aside from LeBron James for a long stretch of time. We'll see how he comes back from this injury, but he could very well be the second best, maybe even best player when he comes back with that Nets team. So it wasn't a big deal, but that's just another last thing I wanted to note with this 40 through 11 ranking. I don't know about that Steph over KD.
Yeah, and while we're on the Steph conversation, let's do a little experiment here or game here. We'll play a Would You Rather. I'll say Steph, and we'll say the guys lower than him, and we'll see how far we'll go. So you think KD over Steph, right?
Yes.
All right. Julius Erving over Steph.
I would say no, but also I've seen Steph because he's my era, and then looking at Dr. J, I've seen some highlights. I know his history. He's won a couple titles. Was great in the ABA, which a lot of people discredit because it's not the NBA, but that's still a professional basketball league, and that's when he had his better prime years. Was I think multiple time MVP.
Yeah.
Was a champion in the ABA. So it's hard to match
champion in the NBA
too. And yeah, in both leagues. So I mean, heck, I'm not really one to say, but I would maybe put Dr. J over Steph Curry. But also Steph Curry was 31. He still has possibly 8 years left, especially because he's a shooter, so he could last in this league for a while. So I think by the time Steph is done, if he's not past Dr. J right now, he will be. There's no doubt.
Yeah, I agree. Would you have Steph Curry over Karl Malone, though? The mailman. The guy's the second leading scorer of all time. Really?
Definitely. Because he's a great scorer like Karl Malone is. He had a revolutionary post game, but Steph had a revolutionary 3-point game, and he won 3 chips with it. Karl Malone won 0.
But think about it, though. Look who Steph has to beat in his NBA championships versus Karl Malone. Karl Malone had to go through a much tougher LeBron, just LeBron, though. Karl Malone had to go through a much tougher gauntlet in his – come on. Is Kyrie even on this list?
He's not. I mean,
he's right, yeah.
He'll be at the end of his career, but, I mean, Dame is 72, and he's not better than Dame. So, I mean, I bet Kyrie would be in the 80 range or something, but – yeah.
But the thing with Karl Malone, it's he had to go through such tougher competition in his era. He had to go through guys like Hakeem Olajuwon, Jordan in the finals twice with Rodman and Pippen. That was a dynamic trio. The Seattle Supersonics with Gary Payton and Sean Kemp. I'm trying to think off the top of my head here. In the West, Shaq was there during that era. David Robinson during that era. Patrick Ewing in that era. Just of all the big men, Karl Malone, I think, gets a lot less credit than he deserves, strictly because, let's be clear, Karl Malone, horrible human being, but basketball player, I think he deserves a little bit more credit. Another guy who I think might be ranked a little too low is Jason Kidd. I think J. Kidd, the guy, something about him, sure, he was only a 12 points per game scorer in his career, but the longevity that he had, how good he was for the majority of his career, he was a triple-double machine. The guy was extremely dominant. I think it's another one of those things where you go back to Steve Nash. Is he better than Steve Nash? Yes.
Yeah, he's better than Steve
Jason Kidd is better than Steve Nash. So it's once again, it comes down to that MVP argument like you made. And one other guy who I think we should talk about, because we mentioned him a little bit earlier, or you did at least, Patrick Ewing, 37th on the list. How much higher? Do you think he should be any higher, or do you think this is the good spot for Patrick?
I think it's kind of a good spot. I mean, he's a little undervalued. I'm reading this book about some of the past teams in
You're reading
history,
a book?
And I mean, it's quarantine. What else
Holy
am I
cow.
supposed to do?
Jeez.
That's what this world has brought us to. Millennials are actually
I never
books,
thought
or
I'd
at least
hear that
I
day.
am. But
that's like me working out.
It's like in this book, it's like it says that the 93-94 Knicks had the best defensive rating in NBA history. Mm-hmm. That was manned by a tough New England Knicks team that gave Jordan some fits. Obviously, Jordan was able to beat them, but it wasn't easy for him at all. This is one of the toughest, strongest defensive teams the league has seen. Sure, Ewing never won a title because Jordan was in his way, which does harm him and his career. Looking at his career, I mean, I'd have to look at the list again. I think it's fine. It's not like controversial, like, whoa, he's way too low. Because there's a lot of great players in this league. And if you don't win a chip, it's really
A lot of
hard to
great
have
players
you
that
in the
never
top.
did.
There is a lot, and yeah, there's a lot of great players that never did. And some players are better than Ewing and also haven't won a chip. So I think he's fine. I'm not mad about it. I'm more mad about the Willis Reed. That's just disrespectful.
I agree. One final guy who I want to mention, unless you have anyone else, and I think we'll have a good conversation on this one. Scottie Pippen, 21. Does he deserve that high of a ranking?
I thought he was a little high at first. I was almost going to mention it, but I don't know. He did win 6 chips. He's a big reason why Jordan was so successful, though. Without Pippen, Jordan won a single playoff game in his career. So,
but without Jordan, Pippen couldn't do anything.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. They both needed each other. And it's kind of unfair to say, if they both didn't have each other, it'd be a lot worse. Well, no, duh. I mean, they're two of the best players of that era as well. Like, a lot of people, especially when Jordan left, Pippen led that team to the playoffs. He was an MVP candidate. I mean, he was a great player. Was always one of the top players in the league. Was a tremendous defender. I relate him kind of to like Kawhi Leonard. Maybe if Pippen was in his career, what, you don't like that?
I don't like that at all.
Why?
I take Kawhi over Pippen any day of the week.
Oh no, I would take Kawhi over him, but I'm saying he's kind of that similar player. Obviously, Pippen has more rings than Kawhi, but that's because he had Jordan. So maybe if Pippen never had Jordan, would he have a career like Kawhi? Would it be worse? We don't know because we can't manipulate history like that.
Here's what I think, personally. I think if Pippen never joined Jordan, I don't think Pippen would have ever gotten a ring. Maybe one if he
it's just hard to
if
say
he jumps
on
a team.
You don't know how his career would have turned out. He could have gone to a bad team, a great team. I mean,
right, obviously. But I think if Pippen was just on a regular team that Jordan was on when he got drafted in '84 to the Bulls, and he got drafted by a team that was middle of the road, bottom of the pack, you get what I'm saying?
I don't think he got drafted by the Supersonics. He just got traded to the Bulls.
So that was pre-Gary Payton too. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's just say he got drafted and didn't get traded. He was a Supersonic his full career.
So do I think he wins a championship on his own as a number one guy? No. I think he would need a second person along with him, whether that be Jordan or Gary Payton, who they drafted a couple years later, or whomever. I think Jordan, though, despite not winning a championship, I think just the losses against the Pistons in 89 and 90 and during that pre-championship era, I think Jordan still would have been pushed to win a championship. So maybe he probably would not have gotten 6, but we saw in the Last Dance. Once again, I know I keep referencing it, but it's a great source of information during these
especially
times.
For us, because we weren't there during the actual era.
Right.
This is almost all we have.
Like Jordan, there were a lot of times where Scottie would just take himself out, whether it be the migraine game, the back game, and Jordan just took over. I think Jordan would have won a couple championships without Scottie and the core that was there. I don't think Scottie would have won maybe one if he had that same team without Jordan.
Yeah. All right, so we looked at most of the list, 74 through 11. Now, the big part, top 10 players, NBA history.
Get your popcorn ready.
Yeah, so first we'll read the list off. I think they did a good list with the players. I mean, most people would agree these are the top 10 players. No matter what order you put them in, it's kind of hard to argue that any players are better than these 10.
With one exception.
You'll get to in a sec, but let me read the list first. So at number 10, Shaquille O'Neal, Big Diesel, Shaq. His teammate, Kobe Bryant, at number 9. Yeah, we both. Rest in peace to him. At number 8, Tim Duncan, big fundamentals. Number 7, Larry Bird. And you have number 6, Wilt Chamberlain. Now getting into the top 5 players. Got another Laker, Magic Johnson, rounding up the top 5. Number 4, Bill Russell, 11 championships in all, Bill Russell. Number 3, Kareem. And in the top 2, the big heated debate, they have LeBron 2, MJ 1. So, with that list said, let's get into how we would rank the top 10 players. But first, you think one player shouldn't be in this list?
It's not that I don't think one player shouldn't be on this list, but I think you definitely can make the argument. I know Oscar Robinson's 11 and Hakeem Olajuwon is 12, but I definitely think you can make the argument for Hakeem Olajuwon being a top 10 player in NBA.
Yeah, here's my honorable mention. Yeah. I had him at 11. I really wanted to put him in my top 10. Mm-hmm. It's like he is one of the all-time greats, but it's just, again, who are you going to take out? I mean, it's just hard mention Hakeem real quick. Only player in NBA history MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, and Finals MVP in 1 year. When Jordan was gone, he made it clear he was the best player during that time frame. He won back-to-back chips.
Took advantage.
And, yeah, he took advantage, cemented his legacy. One of the only players to get a quadruple double in NBA history. I mean, Hakeem, he was in the same draft as Jordan as well. I mean, you think about that draft. You have two of arguably the top 10 players in NBA history in the same draft. That's pretty special.
What's actually interesting was that I believe, if I've heard the story right, the Blazers – so Hakeem went 1 to Houston. No doubt there. And then the Blazers had the second pick. They went with Sam Bowie. They thought about trading that number 2 pick to Houston, taking I think for Clyde Drexler. So they would the number 1 overall pick would go to Portland, and Clyde Drexler and the number 2 overall pick would go to Houston, and they would have drafted
MJ number 1.
They would have drafted MJ number 1 and to play. It was something crazy where they would.
That is
no,
the
you know
reason
what?
Why they didn't.
I think they were trying to pair, I think, Clyde with Jordan or pair Hakeem with Jordan. It was something like that. But either way, if that happened where the Blazers don't take Sam Bowie and get Jordan, who knows where we're standing right now.
Yeah. But
I know I just went off on a completely wrong tangent, but
no, it's all right. We're still looking at the top 10 here.
Mm-hmm.
You want to go first? Who do you have number 10 on your list?
We're going 10. I have Bill Russell.
Wow.
Yeah. I know he's number 4.
Wow.
Sure, 11 championships. The guy's got the Finals MVP trophy after him. But when you look at the 3 other centers in this list, Kareem, Shaq, Wilt Chamberlain. Sure, Russell got the chips, but he wasn't better than Chamberlain. Sure, they had great battles. I think I'd take Chamberlain over him. I think Shaq would have dominated Bill Russell. He would have bullied him big time. And Kareem, guy's got 5 championships, the longevity of his career, the NBA's all-time leading scorer. That's a no-brainer. He's already ahead of him on the list. So
I don't know how you could say Wilt's better than Russell. They played in the same era. One guy had 11 chips. One had a single chip.
But
sure, Wilt might have been more dominant,
cast.
had greater stats, but that's the same argument with Westbrook. He had greater stats and everything, but then you look at Curry, more chips, better legacy, who's better point guard.
But obviously, a supporting cast, though. A supporting cast. Russell had Bob Cousy, Sam Jones, John Havlicek, I think, was on those teams. Red Auerbach was his coach, one of the greatest coaches of all time. Who did Wilt have? Sure, he played with Jerry West and Elgin Baylor toward the end of his career.
They won him a chip pretty much because that was at the back end of his career. He would have had 1 chip without them. But, I mean, I don't know. Empty stats with it. And this is – I'll get into this when I bring up Wilt later. But it was an 8-team league. For you to have 1 or 2 chips during that whole time and you're one of the best players ever, I just don't really buy it. I mean, he's a great player. He'll be in my list soon. But that's disrespectful to Bill Russell. I mean, 13 years, he got 11 championships. That's just greatness as in any sport. It's unparalleled. It's unheard of. Almost won it every single year. Won it his second year, pretty much didn't lose. Won 8 in a row and then 1 break.
But hold on. First of all, it was in a year where there were, 12 teams in the NBA? The NBA
was 8 in like the 60s, and it got to like 12 towards the end of their career. So there was like no, but they were both played in the same era. So you can't say Bill played with.
But also, it was just the era. There was no shot clock. There was no 3-point arc, so they had to rely on a big man. Bill Russell's only competition was Wilt at the center position. Look at the guys who Shaq had to go up against. Look at the guys that Kareem had to go up against. And when you look at the stats, Wilt Chamberlain better scorer, not the better rebounder. That goes to Russell. Shot blocks wasn't a thing, but from according to records,
Russell was better defender. He's one of the best defensive bigs in NBA history. He's definitely better defender, rebounder, and a champion, multiple-time MVP. And you have to take the eras into consideration. Of course, Shaq might have been more dominant against Bill Russell, but it's totally different, 2 different NBAs. You can't really compare them. So you just have to look at how did one player do in his era compared to the other. And Shaq didn't dominate the way that Bill Russell did, at least in terms of success. I mean, Shaq was very successful. I'm going to my 10th. It is Shaq. I think he's the 10th best player in the top 10. And people call him the most dominant player at the center position. I think he's the second most. My number 9 is the real most dominant player at the position. I mean, no doubting Shaq 15-time All-Star, 3-time champ with the Lakers, won Finals MVP all 3 years. Then D-Wade helped him win one in South Beach. Undeniably great talent. I think easy top 10 player. That ESPN has him at 10th. I agree with that ranking. I think it's pretty suitable. There are 4 centers we both have. Everyone has in their top 10. If you don't have Hakeem, and they're the ones that you mentioned. And I just think that Shaq, given his career, is the bottom of those 4. And I think it's a lot to do with his mindset, because he easily could have been the greatest player ever if he had that Kobe MJ type of mindset where he was focused in on the game, didn't let outside distractions get in the way, was motivated every practice like Kobe was when he was on the same team as him. Because you look at Shaq with his Orlando days, he was fit, he was fast, he could dribble the ball, run it up the court. I mean,
Right.
He was a problem. Then he started gaining weight in LA, but he also was older and getting stronger, so that played into a different role in his game. But if he just, I don't know, if he was more motivated, and Kobe said this too, he could have been the best ever. They could have won many more rings if Shaq was more motivated. So that mindset, I think, holds him back. And looking at the era, he didn't dominate the way Bill Russell did or Kareem or someone. So I think 10th is good for Shaq in this list.
Yeah, I got Shaq a little bit higher. I think the one thing with Shaq is that during those Orlando days, sure, he was really, really good. He made the 50th All-NBA 50th anniversary team when at the time, who knows what Shaq was really going to be. Sure, he had a great early career, and then he became the legend of Shaq. But he was doing movies. He was doing the rap albums. And it wasn't until Phil Jackson became his coach where he really started to just solely focus on basketball. I think had he solely focused on basketball, Shaquille O'Neal would be definitely a 5-time champion, maybe even a 6, because he got robbed in Orlando when Nick Anderson missed those free throws in Game 1 against Houston. And then, who knows, if he was more motivated in that 04 season and he and Kobe didn't have that riff, maybe they win that one against the Pistons as well. That's the thing, too. It's just he and Kobe's relationship, it just got to that point where it was beyond repair. I think that's what also hurt him in the end, where he was like, I don't want to play with this guy, so I'm going to hold out and get surgery later in the year, which he had similar to Pippen in that 98 season where he's holding out for the contract. He held out, elected not to get the surgery, and then came back out of shape. It wasn't great for that 04 season or 03 season and in history. But I have Shaq a little bit higher. So let's just get to number 9, because I think we both have the same guy since you hinted at it. Is it Wilt Chamberlain?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think 9 is suitable because he honestly was the most dominant player. You look at the stats, he holds pretty much every single point record in terms of in-game and per season. I think all of them belong to Wilt because in terms of domination, no one parallels to Wilt. I know Shaq was a big, brutal force and was dominant that way, but Wilt was bigger. He was one of the strongest players in NBA history, bigger than everyone else aside from Bill Russell. That was really his only competition. So that allowed him to get 50 points and 25 rebounds in one season, which is absolutely insane. And, I mean, I'm not saying he's not great. He's actually 11-time rebounding champ. I didn't know that. I just looked this up. So he is on the same level rebounding as Bill Russell. 13-time All-Star, 10 times All-NBA, 7-time scoring champion. So, I mean, the numbers are there. He's obviously, I think, one of the top 3 centers. You can't really deny that. But just looking at him being in the same era as Bill Russell and how much better success-wise Bill Russell was, I think that's a huge knock on Wilt Chamberlain, especially considering there were only around 8 to 12 teams at the time. The competition was very weak. There were only a couple really good players and then a bunch of role players who forgettable in NBA history because they were just not good. The NBA was just starting up at this time. The talent level wasn't the same. And, yeah, I just think that holds him back, the fact that he only got 2 titles. One, he wasn't even the best player on the team. And, yeah, that's why I'm Wilt at 9.
Yeah, so for me, with Chamberlain over Bill Russell, Chamberlain averaged more points per game in his career, edged him out in rebounds, 22.9 to 22.5, edged him out in assists, 4.9 to 4.3 assists per game. And just the one thing was the championships. But still, the guy was but it goes back to my argument of who was that supporting cast? Who was around him?
It wasn't that big a factor.
But you don't know, you don't know any of Chamberlain's teammates from his time pre-Lakers. Can you name any of them?
That's why he got so much. His stats were so high, though. He had no one. It was literally just him. So if you're looking at, he had better stats because he had nobody. But, he didn't win chips because he had nobody. But so Russell, it's kind of, you could go either way on that. I just think 11 chips, I mean, it's unreal. Like, I know it's a team sport and chips are like everyone works towards it. But in the NBA, the player has the most impact on a championship more than any other sport. And especially at this time, Bill Russell was the reason they won, not Bob Cousy, not Havlicek, who I think was later in the career. I don't even know.
Red Auerbach, though.
I don't.
I mean,
Sure, great coach, but Bill Russell is what made it all work and come together. In just 13 seasons, won 11 times. I mean, that's almost perfection. I mean, Jordan 6-0 is perfection. How about 13 for 11 or 11 for 13?
Yeah,
that's literal perfection. That's
not literal perfection, but yeah, I get the argument you're saying. It's really you're pulling hairs at this point. I think with Russell though, if you take Russell and Chamberlain, I don't think you could plug. If you plug Chamberlain into any era outside of this era because of the three-point arc, I think Chamberlain could thrive. I don't know you could say that about Russell. I just don't know compared to some other big men how well he'll do. So that's because he sure was a great rebounder. But I don't know if he was the type of score or low post threat that someone like a Chamberlain, someone like a Shaq can be. Shifting to number 8 now, this was like 6 through 8 was hard for me.
I was just about to say 6 through 8. I have the players, but the ranking switched on and off.
I just changed it like 5 minutes ago. So for me though, I have Larry Bird.
Hey, me too.
All right,
I switched him too. He was at 6 at one point, but then I looked at it. I'm like, I think he might be towards 8, but I'll let you explain why.
Yeah, I mean, the guy, brilliant shooter, changed the year. He was tied to Magic Johnson. Right. It was him and Magic Johnson when they were both drafted. Bird in 79, Johnson in 80. They were tied at something like that, 78, 79. Maybe it was Isaiah Thomas in 80. I don't remember. But they were tied to the hip.
79 they got drafted.
They were both 79? Okay.
Yeah.
They were tied to the hip with one another when they came into the league. The great rivalry. Bird, 3-time champion, multiple-time MVP. I'm trying to find my notes as I keep scrolling past. There it is. Yeah, 3-time NBA champion, 2-time finals MVP, 3-time league champion, 12-time All-Star, 9-time first-team All-NBA, dream team member. The guy could do it all. But I think compared to the two guys I have ahead of him at 7 and 6, it just came down to the championships for me. I mean, three is great, but when you look at the guy who you were compared to in Magic, who has 5, and Bird, you could make the argument had the better team compared to Magic. You make the argument. But I think that ultimately in the end has him pushed down a little bit lower. But once again, I had him higher at one point. I moved him down. So it's really, you're pulling hairs at this point, like I just said.
I don't look as much at the rings. He does have less rings than the two players I have above of him at 6 and 7.
I think we have the same guys.
Yeah, it probably. I think it's more the career longevity. He did deal with injuries towards the end that cut his career short. But I'm just looking at what he did in his career. He was an all-star pretty much, I think, every year he played, 10-time All-NBA player. And in the first year when he was a rookie as well as Magic Johnson, he actually was the better rookie at first. He won Rookie of the Year, had better numbers. And that Celtics team went from 20 wins to 60 wins because of a rookie. One rookie had a 40-win.
The Lakers won the championship, though.
Insane. No, I know. That's why Magic is higher on our list because he's a better player. But I'm just saying at the start, the impact Larry had was unreal. The entire decade, the Celtics were a top team along with the Lakers. And him in Magic pretty much made the NBA what it is today. The popularity rose tremendously from this era. This is a fun era of basketball, competitive, a lot of great talent in the league. And like I said earlier with the Bill Walton argument, the 70s weren't that great in terms of competition. The NBA wasn't as popular at that time. This boosted the popularity of the NBA dramatically, which is a kudos to Larry Bird, and it helps with the ranking because the way you impact the league even outside of your numbers and championships goes a long way, which is why I think Larry Bird at 8 is a pretty good ranking. It's close to him in the next 2. I'll let you say who's your number 7.
Yeah, my number 7, this one was definitely hard for me because it was Kobe. I mean, if you don't know, I'm the biggest Kobe Bryant fan, I think.
Oh, I know. I don't know if the audience knows.
That's what I'm saying, the audience. I know you know.
Yeah.
I am a huge Kobe Bryant fan. I cried when he passed away, tragically. I wanted to put him at 6, but I just couldn't do it. I think he has to be here because although he has the 5 championships, he was carried in 3 of them, arguably, maybe at least, probably 2 of them because he did the carrying in 01. Yeah, 01, he did the carrying over Shaq. But he had Shaq. in those first 3 championships. And then for the longest time, it was, can he win one without Shaq? And it wasn't until they got Pau Gasol that he didn't. Sure, he had some great years. He had a 35-point-per-game season. He won an MVP. He was a perennial All-Star, perennial first-team All-NBA. He won the All-Star Game MVP 4 times. So, great player, great scorer. But the fact that he really only won 2 championships as the alpha dog, that pushes him down my list. But once again, I considered him for 6, but I think the top 6 is that very solid group of guys who were the best to do it.
Yeah, I have him at 6, and at 7 I actually have the other guy you probably have 6, which is Tim Duncan.
Yeah.
The 2 that dominated the 2000s are compared to, retired the same year, have kind of the same legacy. Both have 5 rings.
One had the farewell tour.
That played like 20. I think they both played 20 years for the same team, which is like unheard of, and great careers. I had Tim Duncan originally ahead of him, but I'll get to why I have Kobe higher in a second. But I mean, when you look at consistency, like a model of consistency, that is Tim Duncan. He's called the big fundamental for a reason. Every year he gave you the same thing: 20, 10, 3, and like 2 blocks for pretty much his entire career, from his rookie year where he won Rookie of the Year all the way to his final season. And it is a good argument. A lot of people will point to this. He was the alpha dog all 5 of those years. Even when they had David Robinson that one year, you could argue maybe he was 1B to David Robinson's 1A at
in 1999.
Yeah, their first chip together. They both had great coaches. Phil Jackson for Kobe on his first stint. For all 5 of them. Never mind. He had Phil Jackson all 5 of his rings, and then Tim Duncan had Greg Popovich, 2 of the greatest coaches ever. So they had pretty similar careers. I just think that Kobe, his mentality, his Mamba mentality, his clutch shooting, all that, which we'll get into in a sec, give him a slight edge. But I mean, Tim Duncan, 15-time All-Star, 15-time All-NBA player, back-to-back MVPs. Talk about consistency. He, for 2 years, was consistently the best, and then was just a top 5 great talent for the rest of the entire decade. Is the best power forward undoubtedly in NBA history, and I'd argue he's near that top 5 with Kobe, Larry Bird in the mix as well. This 6 or 8 was a little tough in terms of ranking. What does ESPN have him? I think he's 6.
ESPN has Duncan 7. No, he has an 8. He has an 8. It's 10.
They also have Kobe 9.
Kobe 9, Duncan 7, or Duncan 8, Bird 7.
Yeah, but also Tim Duncan, he was the alpha dog in those 5 championships, but he only won 3 Finals MVP, and Kobe won 2. So I mean, sure, he might have been the alpha dog, but in terms of the finals, I mean, he didn't come out. He wasn't the best player for 2 of those series, so you could argue that. I mean, Tim Duncan's a great player. Don't get me wrong, but I have Kobe a little higher, which I'm surprised. I thought you would have had Kobe ahead of him, because I know Kobe fans always want to say Tim Duncan's better, and then Kobe haters, no, Tim Duncan's better, but it's close. Those 2 definitely defined an era, are neck and neck in all-time rankings.
Yeah, that's the thing. Duncan, I have at 6. It was neck and neck. I wanted to, but it came down to who was better during, like, Duncan, for the entirety of his career, he was uber consistent. Like you said, he was a perennial. He averaged 19 points per game in his career, 10.8 rebounds, 2.2 blocks. Was a dominant big man. And he went up against some really good big men during that era. He went up against Shaq. He went up against Kevin Garnett, Dirk Nowitzki, Alonzo Mourning for part of his career, Dikembe Mutombo for part of that career, Yao Ming. The list goes on and on and on. He stood the test of all of them, and he's probably better than all of them. Although I do have one of those guys, I'll be honest, Shaq ahead of Tim Duncan, but we'll get to that in a moment. And the 2 times that Tim Duncan didn't win the finals, it was 2007, I think it was, when they beat the Cavaliers. That one to Tony Parker. That one I really just don't know. I think Tony Parker is one of the most overrated players ever. So that's just me. And then the other time was their final championship, 2014. That was just because Kawhi shut down LeBron. I mean, you can't fault them for that. And Tim Duncan was older. But in 99, 2003, and 2005, Tim Duncan was hands down the best player on those finals teams, and probably even 2007 as well. He lived up to his nickname of the big fundamental. Interesting stat, excuse me. The most regular season wins for a player who played for only one team. We mentioned 20 years with one team. 1,001 wins. Tim Duncan, the most out of any player to play for one team. The guy, he's an icon. Was never outspoken. He just stuck to his game plan, stuck to what he knew what he had to do, and just performed night in and night out. Which you can't say a lot about. You can't say a lot about a lot of guys. Duncan, it pained me to put. It was really hard for me to put him ahead of Kobe, but he is definitely well deserving and probably could have made the top 5, honestly, because he is the best power forward, hands down.
Yeah, it's really consistency it comes down to with Duncan, because you look at Kobe, who's actually my number 6. He's been consistently great, but also he's missed the most shots in NBA history. And he's not always made great shots. I mean, look at his rookie year. He had the infamous airball game. But, I mean, that was –
But he wanted to take those shots. Kobe wanted to learn.
He had to learn from those mistakes, and he has the same kind of career. A lot of people compare him to MJ, obviously, because the game is almost identical. I mean, it's crazy how much Kobe embodies MJ, and he's just was that face of the league like MJ was in the 90s, Bron was in the 2010s. Kobe, even though Duncan might have been on his level in the 2000s, that was Kobe's era. Everyone remembers 2000 as Kobe's era. Those are 3 of the most iconic players in NBA history, Kobe, LeBron, and MJ in their own rights. And I know they both played for the same team, but Duncan had the same system, had almost the same core his entire time, which is in a situation where he would always thrive and it would be easy for him to win 60 wins a year every year. Kobe, of course, he had Shaq at the beginning of his career, and then one more towards the end of the decade. But that middle part showed really the heart of Kobe. And that had some of his best single performances we've ever seen. The 81 game history, best, I don't care, Wilt scored 100. That was in a multiple overtime game. He scored most of it at the free throw line. And he did that all the time. That was like a regular game almost for him. Kobe's 81-point game is the greatest offensive feat ever for a single game.
I agree.
Unreal. No one's ever matched it. No one's gotten really close. I mean, some people have gotten 70, like Devin Booker recently.
I think David Thompson was 73. I mean,
that was so long ago, though. I'm talking that was something we've never seen before. He got robbed of MVPs those years because his team was awful. Kwame Brown, Smush Parker, all these guys are just terrible. No help at all. He went from Shaq, which is a great help, to literally nothing. He could have easily wanted out. I think there were rumors he would have traded to the Bulls. He wanted out of there, but he stuck with it. He put up great, unreal numbers, scoring 35 a game, 31 a game, back-to-back years. And then he finally got some pieces to help him, and then he showed that he could win a championship on his own with Pau Gasol, Ron Artest, all those guys helping out. He won both Finals MVPs those years. He won the chips. And he just also, it's the clutch mamba mentality that I think puts him ahead of Duncan. Because sure, Duncan was never really in those situations where he would have to hit a game-winning shot or something like that or put the team on his back because he was in such a well-organized system. But just the way that Kobe did it so many times, I think he probably has the most career-winning buzzer beater shots in history. He's definitely up there. He's the best bad shot maker we've ever seen. I mean, especially the first thought of Kobe is that Sun series where he just hit 3 insanely contested buzzer beaters in the playoffs to eventually win that game. I mean, no one else does it like Kobe. And then just the story behind it too, how he goes out, scores 60 on his final game. I mean, we shouldn't take story into consideration too much because it's more about the actual play of it. But it's just hard when looking at Kobe. The impact he's had overseas as well. People love him in China and overseas, and just the impact he's had globally. I think Kobe is slight edge over Tim Duncan.
Yeah, I mean, that's what made it so hard for me between Kobe and Duncan. You brought up great points. But that's the issue, though. It also comes down to the fact that Duncan had that uber consistency. He was the main reason for that consistency. He never created any rifts on his teams. Kobe, similar to Jordan, created a lot of rifts on his team. It was hard to play with Kobe a lot of times. A lot of guys couldn't thrive in that environment. And I think it wasn't until he got the pieces and he got back Phil Jackson that Kobe was able to win at that high of a level. Duncan, I mean, obviously it's one of the biggest what ifs. What if Duncan didn't play in that Spurs system? What if Greg Popovich wasn't the coach that he was? Would Duncan be considered an all-time great? Who knows?
He almost also didn't play. He wanted to be a swimmer too. Like he easily could have not played basketball.
What if he went to Orlando? Duncan almost went to Orlando in 2003, and because I think they didn't allow his wife to go on the team plane or something like that when in between games, he ended up staying in San Antonio. It's just one of those things where who knows? But Tim Duncan, Kobe Bryant, two guys definitely deserving of being all-time greats. They both will be elected into the Hall of Fame this year whenever that in that ceremony happens. Obviously, Kobe will be not present, but both guys highly deserving and titans of the game, greatest of their eras, respectively. Although it's the same era, no doubts with that.
So 6 through 8, we did have the same players, a little bit different ranking. I'm assuming
sure
1 through 4 will have the same players, probably same rankings. I don't know. I think number 5, we're gonna have some different players.
Yeah,
Who's your number 5?
Shaq. It's Shaq.
It's Shaq. Yeah,
yeah.
I thought.
I mean, can you dig it? I'm not gonna say in the Shaq voice because I can't do it justice, but the guy, like I said, the most dominant big man, dominant player in NBA history, arguably. I think he would topple Kareem, topple Wilt, topple Bill Russell if all those guys were in their primes playing in a game, without doubt. 23.7 points, 10.9 rebounds, 2.3 blocks a game. Sure, he got carried by D Wade in 2006, but he was arguably the main guy on those 3 Lakers teams. He won the 3 Finals MVP. He was a one-time league MVP. Probably should have won at least 2 or 3. Steve Nash. I gotta let that one go. But 15-time All-Star, 3-time All-Star Game MVP. The guy, there's not enough you can say. It's still, and you mentioned a little earlier with Shaq. Had he had the mindset of Kobe, of Jordan, of if I focus on basketball, I could be possibly the greatest of all time. I think had he had that focus from the moment he was drafted in 1992, I think he wins one with the Magic at least. He wins maybe a couple more with the Lakers, and maybe he has a better ending to his career than the Achilles tear in Boston and the unrememberable seasons in Cleveland and Phoenix. I mean, Shaq, he should have had more in his career. It just all came down to the mindset. And by the time he realized that, it was too late. So, but for what he was and that thought of, holy cow, this guy could have been even better. That's not why I have him so high, but this guy was so good, so dominant during his era. He deserves his higher ranking. He's arguably the best center in NBA history.
Yeah, and listening to you, the one part that really stuck out to me is what he could have had.
Right.
Because I agree with you. I mean, if you put Bill Russell on Shaq one-on-one, Shaq's going to destroy him. I mean, he's taller, bigger, stronger. I mean, he has more technique than Bill Russell. I mean, it's obvious that he's probably the better player if you put him one-on-one. But you just can't do that. They're from different eras, different NBAs. And the fact that Shaq could have done more is why I deduct a little bit. He's still top 10 talent to me, one of the greatest centers in NBA history. But the fact that he didn't accomplish as much as he could have accomplished as much as possible kind of deducts that for me. And instead, I have Bill Russell. So we have our 5 and 10 swapped.
Yeah.
I just think Bill Russell was Tim Duncan before Tim Duncan. He was consistency at its finest. He was excellence, a champion, played 13 seasons, 12-time All-Star, 11-time All-NBA, 11-time NBA champion. Unreal how amazing he was year in and year out. Also a 5-time MVP, so he was just the best player in the league 5 times. I don't know how many Wilt had, but I think it was along those lines as well.
Wilt had, I'll tell you right now.
They played in the same era as well.
Wilt, I don't think, won an MVP.
Not a single one?
Maybe that, yeah. It doesn't look like it. I'll Google it.
No, he's a 4-time MVP. Look at basketball reference. So they had the same amount of MVPs.
Huh. I totally skipped over it when I was writing.
But when it's also when you think of an NBA Mount Rushmore, which we've talked about people have talked about during the MJ and LeBron debate, like it would both be on the Mount Rushmore, who's better than who, whatnot. Yeah. Obviously, those two are on it. We'll both get them on our list later. But I think Bill Russell has to be on that Mount Rushmore just because of how consistently dominant he was, how he has the most chips by far. He has almost double MJ, who some people consider the GOAT because he was 6-0. Bill Russell almost doubled that. And I know it's different leagues. He's obviously not as good as MJ, but just that fact, I mean, you have to respect that. That's greatness. There's a reason the Finals MVP is named after him, because he was in the finals pretty much every single year. He's the best Celtic in their storied franchise. I think he's
The best
second
Celtic?
best center. He's
Is he the best Celtic?
Easily. You
He's
think
got Larry Bird.
think Larry Bird is better than Bill Russell?
I don't think better in terms of talent, but in terms of Celtic history.
Talent or accolades. There's no doubt.
I gotta go Larry Bird.
You're disrespecting Bill Russell. I know it's way before our time, but you have to put some respect on this man. People like Kareem, who we'll get to, have Bill Russell as their GOAT. I know that's kind of a boomer mentality because Bill Russell's not the GOAT.
I think Jordan said that too.
People have. Yeah, Jordan too. I mean, they respect this man's game for what he did during his time, how successful he was. Because if people want to argue that MJ's the GOAT because he has 6 rings, look at Bill Russell. I mean, 11 is unheard of. You have to put him in your top 5 if you're me, and I have done that. I think he's on the Mount Rushmore of NBA history, and for that reason, he's number 5 on my list.
Well, I'm not you, so he is not in my top 5. But we'll get to number 4. For me, I got Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I mean, the guy, the NBA's all-time leading scorer. He's a 6-time NBA champion, 2-time Finals MVP. Sure, a lot of those championships he got carried by Magic in the 80s.
Towards the end of his career.
But he was still a big-time contributor for those teams. 6-time league MVP, 19-time All-Star, the most in history. I think the 6-time league MVP is also the most in history. 10-time first-team All-NBA. The guy just utterly dominant. He had the most unstoppable move that was legal in NBA history with the skyhook, because obviously, like, Shaq bullying someone can be considered a charge a lot of times, something like that. But Kareem, an unstoppable player, the longevity of his career. That's the other thing, too. I got to see how long he did it. And Kareem, from start to end, was phenomenal. So he definitely earns a number 4. He could have been number 3 for me, but the guy at number 3, I think, totally deserves it over Kareem.
I have Kareem at number 3. He can be argued as a GOAT. I mean, his career is unreal. Yes, but moving to number 4, his teammate Magic Johnson, I have at number 4. The best passer we've ever seen, averaged 11 assists for his career, which is unreal. Was great in college, won a championship, then came into the league. And I said that first year, Larry Bird was Rookie of the Year. They won 40-plus wins. But Magic and the Lakers went to the finals, and then when Kareem went down, he had to move to center and then won them the chip that year, won Finals MVP as a rookie, which is just crazy. He's great throughout his entire career, 12-time All-Star, pretty much an All-Star his entire career. Unfortunately, he didn't have the longevity that Kareem had because he was affected with HIV. But during his time, he helped popularize the league, like I said, with Larry Bird, but he came on top more of those times, 5 chips to 3 in case of Larry Bird versus Magic Johnson. But just in terms of dominance as well, like we mentioned with Shaq and Wilt Chamberlain, another Laker who's just extremely dominant at position was Magic Johnson, because he was 6'9" at the point, which was unheard of, how someone that tall could move the ball and play make that well. His career is illustrious, 3-time MVP, Finals MVP 3 of those times. So he did carry Kareem towards the end, but in the middle, Kareem was still in his prime. He was the best player on that team. But no doubt, Magic Johnson, arguably the best Laker ever with Kareem. I have him at number 4 because I don't think Kareem, I've never heard anyone say Kareem's worse than 3. So that's why just say your argument for Magic, and I'll put the rest with my Kareem argument.
Yeah, I have Magic, and you kind of took a lot at the points I was going to say. The guy, 5-time champion, 3-time and Finals MVP, 3-time league MVP. He revolutionized the game. Like you mentioned, a 6'9" point guard. Who would have ever thought? And then he obviously played center in that Finals, where he won the Finals MVP his rookie year. And without question, he was the face of the 80s for the NBA. Some say it's Bird, others might say Jordan, but I'm going to go with Magic. I think Magic, he lived up to the hype that was surrounding him when he came out of college. Like, everyone thought, oh, Magic Johnson, number 1 overall pick, Michigan State. I'm trying to think of the word. He just had that charisma about him that just said, I'm going to be a superstar. And he was. Showtime Lakers. The guy was the best team on those teams. And I think that's why ultimately edges him over Kareem for me. The fact that Magic was the better player on those teams than Kareem, especially in the later portion of Kareem's career. But you can make the argument for some of those championships that Magic was the alpha dog, and without those teams, without Magic, those teams for the Lakers in the 80s do not win the championship.
Also, Magic never won without Kareem, and Kareem won without
But he never
Magic.
played without Kareem. He never played
What?
without Kareem.
I'm pretty sure 91 finals, when he lost to the Bulls, Kareem was not on that team.
He was.
All right, so moving to number three. Moving to number 3, I have Kareem at number 3. All-time leader in points, all-time leader in win shares. That should almost be enough, but there's so much more. His career, his longevity is only matched by LeBron James, who we'll get to soon. He played 20 years, 2 decades. He was one of the best players. Looking at the 70s, which was his prime years, that's when he won a chip without Magic. He won the Finals MVP that year.
But he won
MVP multiple times. He won MVP. That's more than Magic without Kareem. He won MVP multiple times in the 70s. That's when he was a better player. In the 80s, when he won more chips when he was on the Lakers, that was toward the back half of his career. So from 85 on, I think they won 2 or 3 titles. Career was 16 years deep into his career. So, of course, Magic was the better player, but Kareem was essential to that team. As you mentioned, the hook shot, the one impossible shot to cover or to contest in NBA history. I mean, he broke the league. That's why he leads the league in points, because no one could stop it. 6-time MVP is the most in NBA history. 6-time champ, as I mentioned. And he was also a 19-time All-Star in his 20-year career. So the longevity and just the career marks, I think, put Kareem in the top 3. He's also another guy I would put on the Mount Rushmore of NBA players.
So you would have your Mount Rushmore, I'm assuming, Jordan, LeBron, Kareem, Russell?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. So here's the thing with your argument that I find, I would say wrong, but I'm gonna. So Kareem played 20 seasons in the NBA. Magic played in, there's the number. I'm trying to find the math. Played in like 14. 12, yeah. 1979 to 1991. He played 9 games in 96, but I'm not going to count that at all. The fact the Magic played 1 season without Kareem, or 2 seasons without Kareem, 89, 90, 90, 91, where he was 30 and 31. Kareem played arguably the majority of his prime without Magic, from his rookie year in 1969, 1970 up until 1979, 1980. He played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 seasons without Magic, and he only won 1 title.
He was also, I think, 5 times, or he might have won all 6 MVPs during that span.
Probably.
And
did.
He won a chip without Magic, which Magic never won a chip
but
without
he played
Kareem.
2 seasons without Kareem. Magic did. You can't penalize.
But he still has
that.
more chips. That's also, you're going to discredit Kareem for being one of the best players for an entire decade before he was even on the Lakers with Magic, and was still one of the best players for another decade.
I'm not discrediting it, but
there's a whole decade of dominance. You're saying because he didn't have like 3 chips or whatever, that he wasn't better than Magic. But I'm sure we wouldn't know. Like, you can't really take into effect Magic getting a disease because his career's short. Maybe he would have had a longer career, won more chips, but he didn't. Kareem had a longer career, had a better career, had more accolades, led the NBA in more stuff. Sure, he only won 1 more chip without Magic, but that's 1 more than Magic won without Kareem. And sure, Magic maybe would have won more without Kareem, but then you think, oh, now we're in the Jordan era. Is Magic really going to lead a team against that Jordan's Bulls team?
Not at his age, no.
That 91 team is what started the Bulls dynasty. So
well,
no matter if he gets the disease or not, Magic is not beating Jordan. He's not winning another chip with or without Kareem. So I don't see how you could argue Magic's better than Kareem. Kareem's amazing. He was the GOAT before MJ came along, not Magic.
I wouldn't say I'm discrediting Kareem for the career he had prior to joining Magic, but I'm just saying when you compare the two, given the fact that Kareem played 10 years without Magic when he was younger and won 1 championship, sure, he won more MVPs and whatnot, but that in a completely different era in the 70s was a much weaker era compared to the 80s, in my opinion. And the fact that when they linked up in 79, 80, they won 5 championships, and Magic was the best player on those 5 teams, arguably. I just got to give the edge to Magic in this one. I mean, both guys are all-time greats in the league.
Top 5 players.
You can make I had Kareem at 4. You had Kareem at 3. I had Magic at 3. You had Magic at 4. So clearly, you could flip them around. But for me, ultimately, I just think that Magic Johnson, for what he did and how he did it, was better than Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But also the fact that he was a 6'9" point guard, I mean, transcended the game. Let's get into the top 2, though, because let's be real. I think our top 2s are the exact same. Is Jordan, LeBron 1, 2? Or do you have LeBron?
Jordan number 1, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
This, I'm very close. I was very close putting LeBron number 1.
Oh, I wasn't.
It is. Oh, it's very close.
No.
And for people who don't think it's close, they're looking in the past or they're looking at the documentary. Oh, Jordan was so great. LeBron is amazing. And if he wins a chip with the Lakers, I think he might be the GOAT. I mean,
I agree with that.
All right. So do you want to go into LeBron at number 2?
Yeah. So here's what I'll say. For LeBron, why I don't have him ahead of Jordan. And I heard this argument a couple days ago, and when you think about it, I totally agree. LeBron, sure, he made 8 straight finals from 2010 to 2016. But 2018? Okay, 8 straight. Math. But he played who did he have to fend off? He had a lot of trouble. He didn't really have to fend anyone off. The greatest team ever.
The Warriors?
Okay. They're not the greatest team ever because they didn't win the championship.
Arguably. I'm not talking about that 73 and 9 team.
Okay.
I'm talking about the team that had 4 Hall of Famers on it. 5 if you count Iggy.
Here's my issue. I think Iggy is a Hall of Famer, but that's an issue.
That's
for another
a
day.
whole starting lineup of Hall of Famers. That's quite a competition.
You think Draymond's a Hall of Famer?
Yeah, he's a Hall of Famer.
I disagree, but
He's a Defensive Player of the Year, key part of their.
All right, but that's not
this
this
would not
debate.
be the same without Draymond. The screens he set, the way he plays, sure, people don't like him. It's like Isaiah. People didn't like him. I'm not saying
he
he's
screwed
like
the
Isaiah,
Warriors.
but
He screwed the Warriors in
did screw with
2016.
KD, yes, but he also.
No, I'm saying when he drilled LeBron in the nuts and got
That's
suspended.
true. Yeah. He's an idiot. I mean, he's not the best player on that team, but he's a Hall of Famer because of what that team's done.
That aside, LeBron versus Jordan. LeBron 3 and 6 in the finals. That you gotta put that against him to Jordan. And all the guys who Jordan fended off and prevented from winning championships. Patrick Ewing, Charles Barkley, Karl Malone, Clyde Drexler didn't win one until he retired. Hakeem Olajuwon didn't win one until he retired. John Stockton, Reggie Miller, and I'm forgetting more and more. But you get the point. There's a peak list. For LeBron, a lot of his adversaries won championships during his career. The Boston Celtics got those 2 a couple years. The Spurs won it twice. They got beat by the Mavericks, kind of embarrassed by the Mavericks in 2011. Kobe won a couple. I mean, it just ultimately, for LeBron, statistically, right up there with Jordan. He's a better passer, in my opinion, better rebounder, not the better scorer, but he's one of the most dominant players ever. But I think ultimately for Jordan, the fact that he was 6-time NBA champion, Finals MVP, 5-time regular season MVP, won Defensive Player of the Year. He could do it on both ends of the floor. Just overall, his dominance and that extra level he had. I don't really know. LeBron's a great player, but I don't know if he has that extra level that Jordan had where he could do something like this. It's hard to put into words. That's how good Jordan is. He's so good, I can't put it into words.
LeBron is hard to put into words because he's very good as well. So let me go into this. Everyone, obviously, it gets so annoying. 6-0 versus 3 and 6. We get it. The reason that is because LeBron's real competition came in finals time. Sure, everyone points to the weak East he played in compared to MJ's East, which was very tough. All those players you named were almost all of them were on the East. So they played for the East. So that's why when it came to finals time where he had the real competition, that's why his record reads how it is. He had 2 of the greatest dynasties ever in the Spurs for 2 years. 1 year he actually beat them. No, 3 years. One year was with that Cavs team. I'll get to in a second of how crazy that was that year. He brought that Cavs team to the finals. They obviously lost to the Spurs. I was like, peak Spurs, no way they're going to beat them. They got swept reasonably. Then he played the Spurs 2 more times. Once he beat them when he was in Miami, and then the next year they lost. Then you look at the Warriors, another dynasty that's up there top 3 in NBA history. So he had 2 of the greatest dynasties he had to face in NBA history when it came to finals time, which accounted for 4 or 5 of his losses. All of them but the Mavericks one were 2 the greatest dynasties we've seen, pretty much, aside from the Bulls dynasty. So that's why he has 6 losses in that column. But the 3 wins as well are huge because that 3rd win, in my mind, is the greatest NBA accomplishment ever. That was the hardest thing I've ever seen in any sport ever. The fact that not only was that the best team in NBA history at 33-9, just coming off a championship in the middle of their dynasty run where they would make 4 straight NBA finals. But and then the fact that they were down 3-1 in the finals, which no team had ever come back from. Obviously, we all know those points. But LeBron led in every single statistical category for the entire series. Have you heard of anything like that? Talk about a two-way, all-around great player. Points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals. All LeBron in that series. He had the iconic clutch play with the block in the 4th quarter of Game 7 on the road to bring the Cavs their first ever championship, Cleveland's first championship in like 50 years or something like that. And he brought that promise back. He came back to this terrible franchise who, going back to the 2007 argument, brought him a cast of nothings to the NBA Finals. And how did he do it? He had that tremendous game against the Pistons where he scored 29 of their last 30 points in those double overtimes, hit every clutch shot imaginable. The thing people go against LeBron is that he's not clutch. He doesn't take the big shot. That series, he was 22 years old, hit every shot he could, brought them into that Pistons team, which is one of the best defensive teams in NBA history. And that was LeBron's age 22 season. What was Jordan doing age 22? He was a rookie competing in a dunk contest. Sure, he was great. But that was also great. But LeBron brought a cast of nobodies to the finals at his age 22 season. And he didn't have the luxury of going to college before, playing for Dean Smith. He had great parents that helped mold him into the person he is. LeBron, unfortunately, never knew his father. He never went to college. He, from the start of his career, was put in this terrible Cavs franchise ran by an idiot owner who, unlike Jordan with the Bulls, gave him Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman and Phil Jackson and all these places and all these pieces for him to stay with the Bulls and thrive and have a dynasty. LeBron never had a dynasty because he was always on his own. He had no help until he went to the Heat. For the longest time, they were putting him in a position to fail, but he came through in that 2007 series, or in that 2007 year. That was the year before he started winning multiple MVPs. And at that moment on, he was the best player in the league, and he hasn't lost that crown since. He's been the best player in the league for 13 straight years, and no one can argue that. And what did Jordan play for 13 years? So LeBron's been the best for that certain same amount of time. He's been the best during Jordan's entire playing career was 13 years or so. So he's got the longevity that Kareem has. He's probably going to be top 1 or 2 in points all time. He leads MJ in every stat except for points and free throw shooting.
Per game.
Per game and steals. So you could argue, Jordan won Defensive Player of the Year. LeBron in 2012 was second, and he lost to Marc Gasol, who didn't even make first team all defensive player that year. And Mike Conley and Tony Allen were first teamers on the same team, and Marc Gasol won defensive player that year. That easily should have been to LeBron, who won MVP that year, who won Finals MVP that year, who won his first chip that year. So that 2012 LeBron might have been the greatest player ever because he did everything on both sides of the ball. He finally won a chip. He had all the naysayers saying he'd never win it because he hadn't up to that point. He's had people who said Jordan's a GOAT his entire career, pointing out flaws in this game, which are so tiny and minuscule because this guy not only elevates him, but his entire team. He's like Magic. He averages, I don't know how many assists per game, but he averages a lot of assists per game. He's one of the best passers we've seen. He elevates
7.4 assists for his career.
And his basketball IQ is arguably the greatest as well. I've heard people call him the Einstein of basketball. Mm-hmm. He just knows everything. And it's part of the reason is because he's been in the league for so long. He's been dominant for so long. But
Yeah.
just the body of work LeBron has had, I don't care 3-6 versus 6-0. That is not the only argument you could have because Bill Russell would be the GOAT. Bill Russell would be the GOAT easily if that was the only argument.
That is
11 wins in 13 years is better than 6-0, which is better than 3-6. But LeBron, for everything I just said, is why he's number 2 and is this close to be number 1. And one more point before we go into number 1, I'll let you talk. I've been rambling for a while. But a lot of people obviously call MJ the GOAT, the greatest of all time, because he had the greatest career. He had the aura of MJ is something we've never seen before. He brought the NBA to new heights. All these European players and people internationally come to the NBA is because they were witnessing Michael Jordan. His global image is what got them interested in the NBA. So he changed the landscape of the NBA. His brain was unmatched. That's why he is the greatest. But we're talking best individual player, best person to pick up a basketball and play the game. I think it's LeBron, which is why he's second on the all-time list for now. But given that he still has a good 4 years left in his career, he could easily be the top in points, assists, and other categories such as that. I think LeBron is very close to becoming the best. But right now, I still have him at number 2. I'm not that bold yet.
I know.
Very, very, very close.
Yeah, you just went on a massive rant on why LeBron, and you made it sound like you think he's the number 1 player. I agree with you completely. If LeBron wins another championship, he is definitely the greatest player of all time, given what he has done for his career. But
3 chips on 3 different teams, too.
Right. Something
crazy.
Insane. But then the same argument can be made for Kawhi if he wins with the Clippers, but that's an argument
a little
for
different. But yeah.
Right. A little different. But I think you mentioned one thing, age 22 season, what LeBron and MJ were doing. Think about the eras, though. You have it was in the 80s, it was unheard of for guys to go straight from high school into the NBA. Sure, Jordan wasn't ready for it compared to LeBron was, but guys had to go to college and get that coaching and experience. That's what NBA scouts wanted. If LeBron played in the 80s, he probably would have done the exact same thing. He would have gone to college for 3 or 4 years and then come out and do what he did. But I think if LeBron went to college at least for 2 years, instead of being drafted in 2003, got drafted in, say, 2005, everything gets pushed back. So I really don't know.
Again, with the eras thing, though, if we're comparing eras, MJ was in the era where you could hand check and defense was a lot easier to play because you could be on an opponent and guarding closer than right now with softer defense, which leads to more scoring, which might have helped. MJ was notorious for hand checking. Imagine you put him in this league where it's illegal. Does he win Defensive Player of the Year? Is he the same? He's going to be a great defensive player.
But look what he does scoring,
the league in steals. Huh?
But look what he does as a scorer. Right now, it's a lot easier for an offensive player.
MJ's a better scorer than LeBron. I'm just saying, if we're comparing eras, like you made with the not going right to the league argument, then you have to take in defense into argument. And all these other factors that happen when we try to compare eras, which is kind of why it's annoying to compare LeBron and Jordan because they played 2 different eras. They're both undoubtedly – they're both in their eras. It was Jordan, LeBron, then the second best player, like a huge gap underneath for both of them. So they were obviously both the best in their time. It's hard to compare eras, which is why it's kind of hard to compare LeBron to Jordan, which is why people resort to the rings, which is why they say MJ's the GOAT because he's 6-0 versus 3-6. So that's why it gets kind of muddled and all that. But just given the play, just watching LeBron, because I know I wasn't in the Jordan era, you weren't either, but we saw The Last Dance, we've seen the highlights, we know the history, we know how Jordan plays. And then comparing that to what we see now with LeBron, I don't think anyone has played basketball at a higher level than LeBron.
I totally agree with you. Ryan, I think that was a great point to end it on because this has been a long conversation. I just looked at the clock. We started a little after 4:30. It's 6 o'clock. But that just shows how great basketball is. The NBA as a whole, there have been so many great players, so many great just talents to come into this league. And it's just so hard to pick who is really better than the other. There are clear divisions, but I think with LeBron and Jordan, those guys are a step above everyone else, and everyone else is fighting for third place, basically, because those guys are the best. But anywho, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
Well, we didn't get much into MJ, but I think it's pretty
Yeah,
self-explanatory.
we kind of got into it.
Especially if you watch The Last Dance, that speaks for itself. Like
Right.
his brand, his image. That's one thing LeBron will never pass is just the Jordan brand. First
That's on
billionaire
David
basketball
Falk,
player, better shoot. Yeah, that's as well because also
Another
Nike was a
Syracuse
nobody
guy.
before. Yeah, and you minor in Falk, right? So
We're
we're both
waiting.
minors in the school.
We're waiting on an acceptance from
All
Falk.
right,
But,
you'll get it. You'll get it.
yeah.
I'm just assuming right now that you'll get it. So
Hey, Falk
both in
School of
his
Management.
school.
Let me in.
Shout out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and let Tyler in. That too. But yeah, there's a pretty good list. I mean, ESPN did a great job as well. We did have some issues towards like 74 to 41. I think that's kind of harder because that's where you get a large sample of players that could get in versus others. But once you got to like the players are going to be in the list, I think they did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
I liked your list. I hope you liked mine.
You,
I know we had some argument points, but that's part of the sport. That's part of the love of basketball, and I had a fun time.
I did
good.
as
It's
well.
great looking into the history of basketball and some of the greats that have come our way, and just hope for even more greats to come.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I would not be surprised if in 10, 20 years from now, we're looking back on this top 10 list and it is completely different given what is coming. Because who knows? Someone like a Steph, someone like a KD, someone like a Giannis.
Steph and KD are right at the door of top 10.
Someone like a Giannis, someone like a Kawhi, someone like a Zion, who knows, or someone who's not even in the NBA. Luka, maybe. I don't know, but we'll see.
Yeah, we're getting way ahead of ourselves now at this point.
Let's just focus on the present. Yeah. All right. Well, anywho, that's it for this episode of the Chips Podcast. Thank you all so much for listening or watching or whatever the heck you're doing while listening to us babble about basketball or whatever sports it is. For Ryan Amick, I'm Tyler Melito. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.